the Center for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Children. On behalf of our team, welcome to this Learning Network Resource Spotlight. Please think about the traditional lands you are currently situated on and join us in acknowledging and thanking the generations of Indigenous peoples who have cared for these lands and in celebrating the continued strength and spirit of Indigenous peoples. The ongoing work to make the promise of truth and reconciliation real in our communities, and in particular to bring justice for murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls across the country, should inform our discussions in this webinar and beyond. Today, our spotlight is on the new report from the Women's Center for Social Justice, Declarations of Truth, Creating an Alternative Justice Model for Survivors of Gender-Based Sexual Violence, the Transformative Accountability and Justice Pathway to Healing. The presentation will be 45 minutes, followed by a 15-minute Q&A. Please enter questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Earlier today, a link to the presentation slides was emailed to you. That link is now in the chat box. The presentation will be recorded, thanks to Shirley and NECA, and available on the Learning Network website in a few days. I'm now honored to introduce our two speakers. NECA McGregor is the co-founder and executive director of the Women's Center for Social Justice, better known as Women at the Center, a unique nonprofit organization created by and for women and trans survivors of gender-based violence globally. She is also co-host of the engaging podcast, What's Your Safe Word? Among her many accomplishments and prestigious appointments, NECA was the recipient of the YWCA Women of Distinction 2020 Award for Social Justice. Shirley Brookstra is a registered nurse and has a Master's of Education, Psychology, and Community Development from the University of Toronto. As a registered nurse, Shirley contributed to the care of survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence in her position of manager at the hospital-based Sexual Assault and Domestic Violence Care Center in Scarborough, Ontario. Shirley's work was recognized by the Ontario Medical Association in 2011 with the Community Service Award. Following retirement, she is an active volunteer with Women at the Center in the capacity of research associate. You can read more about these dynamic women on our website. NECA, Shirley, thank you, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Linda, and to all your team for inviting Shirley and I here. Shirley and I want to acknowledge with our own humility and respect that we're coming to you on this beautiful autumn day from our home situated on the territory of the Anishinaabe, Mississauga, and Haudenosaunee peoples. So very, very grateful to be here today. So I'm going to start the slides. This is me and Shirley. We're going to zoom through this very, very quickly because it took this, we're going to do in about 45 minutes, explain to you work that we completed in 3.5 years, which is a little bit of a difficult task, but we're going to do it. We're going to have a general introduction. We're going to talk about what we did, why we did it, and then what we did, and then what we found. We're going to go over the model very briefly, and then talk about next steps and have space for questions, as Linda said. We're going to spend just a minute spotlight gratitude moment to the Department for Women and Gender Equality Wage, because without their funding, we would not have been able to have done this work. As an organization, we've been talking about the experiences of sexual violence survivors in our 12-year history for about 7 years. And when we got the funding from Wage, it was an opportunity to actually materialize the conversation. That conversation materialized because, again, the gratitude goes to all the women survivors that we spoke to in Renfrew County and in Toronto during our focus groups and our one-on-one conversations. And so without them and their courage and their openness none of this would have been possible. None of this would have been possible. So our gratitude continues to go out to all of them. And we want to do a very quick advisory and self-care. Some of the language, well, it's uncensored, right? Where we are not in the business of censoring women. Some of the language that you're going to hear will be quite explicit. And some of the declarations that you're going to hear are also, we labeled it as heavy because women are bearing their souls and sharing the experiences they went through of rape and sexual violence. So what we did and why we did it, I'm going to start with a quote from one of the participants of our Renfrew County first focus group, participant number 4. She said, I think that in this room, we're all okay in that we were able to come to this focus group. It's very brave to come. It's very courageous to come and speak. And we talk about it and have our tears and feelings. But there are so many women who are not on this planet because of the violence, and they cannot. They are alone. They feel isolated. They don't have the language. They're so oppressed. They don't make it. There are many women that are dead because they ended their lives because of what happened to them. So for me, it's also the focus of why I'm here, because I feel like we are okay, like we're finding supports. We're reaching out, we're talking, but there are so many women who cannot. And so how do we make the world better in that aspect, right? For women who cannot get outside of themselves and what happened to them. My colleague Shirley.
I'm just going to speak a little bit and give an overview of the gender-based sexual violence within the Canadian context and why we chose to do this work, speaking directly to survivors of sexual violence. So we live in an era in which sexual assault, sexual harassment, and sexual violence are kind of on the forefront of almost every conversation. But progress for women seeking their own sense of justice really hasn't melded out to very many. So the catalyst for us venturing into this project was the Me Too campaigns and the Jian Ghomeshi trial. Each in its own way saw our criminal justice system failing. The slanted reporting, the minimizing of the assaults, the manner in which the lives of women were opened up into intense scrutiny by the media and the public, and then the paucity of counseling supports for these survivors. The women that we talked with confirmed what you already know. Some of the women said that they didn't think what happened to them was very serious enough to lodge a complaint. There's a significant underreporting of sexual assaults, and others continue to live with fear, shame, and fear of reprisal. For some of the women who did report, some determined that the criminal code's threshold of assault was not reached, and there was not a good enough chance to win the case. So charges were dropped or not pursued in court, leaving women wondering how to interpret what happened. As a segue, when I worked with sexual offenders at CAMH, which is in Toronto, back in the mid-90s, I recall one of the researchers telling me that Black men don't rape. I thought, well, this is a little strange, but then I didn't see many Black men that were referred to our relapse prevention program that we had with Corrections Canada and the forensic unit. So I kind of became a believer. Then I left the Clark Institute and then worked with survivors at the Sexual Assault Center. And I knew that that was a myth. And now after our study, I have to wonder, do Black males perhaps get heavier sentences and were not afforded the opportunity for parole or to participate in a community group like we had? Or perhaps the assaults that were perpetrated against fellow Black women. And did she fear going to court or even reporting this assault to the police? So it's something that kind of has me thinking about next steps. Our focus was on women, since we are Women at the Center, and we know that 99% of the sexual assaults are perpetrated on women by men. In our Toronto Court Watch, we listened to trials where there were male-on-male violence, and we also know that there are women perpetrators as well. we recognize that the impact of trauma is equally weighted, regardless of who they are and what gender spectrum they live in. Over to you.
Thank you. So what did we do? We framed it as a kaleidoscope of data. The first thing was we conducted Court Watch, which is something that Women at the Centre is very well known for. Usually we do domestic court watches in the domestic violence, specialized domestic violence courts. This time we monitored sexual assault trials. We were able to witness 13 sexual assault trials between April 2017 and November 2018. And we sat in on trials at Old City Hall in Toronto, as well as Superior Court. So that was pillar number one, Court Watch. The second part was because of, again, there's some really serious challenges with the administration of justice. We wanted to see more trials, but were sort of prohibited for a variety of reasons. So we then therefore switched to the Canadian Legal Information Institute, which is an online resource where judges upload their decisions. And we're able to audit 37 decisions on CanLII. Then we conducted ethics-approved one-on-one interviews with 13 women, 5 in Toronto, 8 in Renfrew County. And this ethics-approved one-on-one interviews were with women who had been raped and had engaged. They had reported to the criminal legal system and had gone through the system from, in one capacity or another. These were our focus groups. And we conduct, one-on-one interviews, and we conducted focus groups. This time we engaged 16 women, 5 in Toronto, 11 in Renfrew County. And this was with women who had been raped and did not report. And then the fifth part of the work on our kaleidoscope of data was we read over 3,000 tweets and Instagram and Facebook posts. We read news articles, we watched news reports, we watched films, documentaries, shows, and listened to podcasts, again, to sort of get an understanding of the discourse around gender-based sexual violence in the community. The participatory research part of it, I'll just load everything. The principal investigators was myself and my lovely colleague Shirley Brookstra and our project coordinator Shalina Hackett. It was survivor-led. We had obviously myself as the ED, our board were heavily involved, our staff, members of the organizations, our students and volunteers of the organization. We sought and received research ethics approval from the Community Research Office in Waterloo, and then drafted study protocols, informed consent, provided honorarium to the women, as well as travel to them. I want to talk very quickly about our community outreach and the community partners that we worked with. As a group, we started talking about people that we classify as gatekeepers as opposed to locksmiths. And the gatekeepers were organizations around in Ontario who we were sort of doing outreach to help us bring survivors to the conversation. But these agencies were more, I think, preoccupied and concerned with, in their mind, and this is being generous, in their mind, they were protecting survivors. Some people refer to our women. We don't want to, expose our women. We view those as gatekeepers because survivors are nobody's women. Survivors are independent. And I think that it behoves every organization, every agency to facilitate opportunities for survivors to speak their truths, right? So those are the ones that we call gatekeepers, people who try to sort of monitor and curtail the types of engagements and activities that survivors would get involved in, and oftentimes may view women as sort of broken and weak, which is completely counter to the other types of organizations that we call locksmiths. And the locksmiths are the ones who open doors, right, and find opportunities to engage survivors. And the biggest locksmiths that we had the incredible honor and pleasure of working with were the women at the Women's Sexual Assault Center of Renfrew County. And I want to give a special shout out to Joanne Brooks and her team, and to Kim Charlebron. And I hope both are, actually all of them are on this call, because honestly, the way they showed up and the way they supported the women in Renfrew County, the way they supported us in doing this work was phenomenal, inspirational, and really, really part of our gratitude moment as well. Other community partners that we spoke to, very quickly go through them: Christopher Cowie, the Community Justice Initiative in Waterloo, Marley and her mother Barbie Liss at an organization called Rehumanize, absolutely brilliant young woman, and her mum. And her work is around restorative justice. for sexual violence survivors and perpetrators. Mia Mingus, who we had a lovely conversation with. Mia Mingus is out in the States. She's a disability rights activist and does a lot of work around transformative justice. We had great conversations with Toronto Police Sex Crimes and the Domestic Violence Unit teams. Incredible supports from the VWAP, Victim Witness Assistance programs in both communities, Renfrew County and Toronto. Joni Cameron Pritchett and her team at York University's Sexual Violence Response Support and Education. We had a steering committee that was set up for the project in, I think, the first year. And special thanks goes out to Janet Mosher, because Janet really was foundational in helping us frame the questions that we then ended up using in the interviews. And we had great conversations as well with the Office of Victims of Crime, with members of their board, and with members of ACTRA. The secondary research that we did, so we went and actually sort of scoured publications looking for alternative other models for sexual violence survivors, including specialized sexual assault courts, which we quickly removed from the equation because there was so many problems with the domestic violence, specialized domestic violence courts, and we just thought it would be too onerous to start a specialized sexual violence courts without fixing inherent problems in the system. We also looked at the possibility of a restorative justice model, which is based on Indigenous communities. And again, for a whole variety of reasons, primarily because none of us on this team identified as Indigenous, we just felt that it would be too much of a cultural appropriation to go down the restorative justice route. So we ended up finding transformative justice, which is a model developed by Black and trans, especially by Black and trans women and disability activists out in the United States. And I wanted to really mention and pay homage to the fact that the work that we have done, the work that we've developed, this model is heavily based on the research and the sweat equity of the Black and trans women and disability activists in the States. And again, wanted to give thanks to specifically these two women, Beth Ritchie and Mimi Kim, who started an organization called Insight. And their whole thing is around abolitionist feminism and getting rid of sort of the carceral system, which we can talk about that on another podcast, another presentation. So over to Shirley. Shirley's going to talk about some of the demographic information from the women that we found. And we're going to really dance through this very quickly because again,
I'm ready. Dance through.
Okay, there we go.
So I'll talk about the one-on-one interview. As Neka had mentioned, there were 5 participants in Toronto. We did have some more difficulty getting participants in Toronto than we did in Renfrew County. The statistics, the demographics between both the one-on-ones is pretty similar. In Toronto, the individuals were a little younger. I think primarily this was due to the recruiting abilities for us, because we used our students to find participants from the university and use the Women at the Center website. So unfortunately, fortunately, 40% of the one-on-one interviews, highest number were 20 to 29. In terms of education, 60% had high school education. In Renfrew County, there were a few higher education levels, and again, I think it was in terms of recruiting. Indigenous, we were really not anticipating that we would be able to capture some of the different cultural aspects with our participants. However, 40% of our participants identified as being Indigenous or in Toronto. There was a high number of participants that identified as being bisexual in Toronto. And of course, 60% of the participants identified as having a disability. Now, for both Renfrew and Toronto, we really didn't ask the question if this has resulted from the assault or whether this was a pre-existing disability. But when we look at the PTSD and as well as anxiety, we can certainly determine that this is related directly to the assault. And friends, the primary individual that the one-on-one interviewers talked to that provided them with the most support in Toronto were friends as opposed to another group. Okay, we'll go to Renfrew County.
Bear with me a minute.
Okay, so I can go through these again. As I mentioned, in Renfrew County, the women in the age group were a bit higher at the end, but this is kind of goes along with the fact that sexual assault can occur at any age. In terms of high school, 50% had high school education. More of the women here had a college diploma or an undergraduate degree. 25% of the participants here were Indigenous, identified either as Métis or Algonquin. The individuals here, the participants, identified pretty well exclusively as heterosexual. And disability accounted for 50% of the women that participated. And again, was this a precursor to violence or caused by violence? We didn't ask. However, again, we see GAD, so that's a generalized anxiety disorder, so we can identify this as being a result of the sexual assault. The individuals in Renfrew County, actually, it was interesting that this group really looked to their family for support, which was a little bit different than the group in Toronto. The focus groups, again, we had less participants in Toronto than we did in Renfrew County. The age spectrum was pretty well the same, 50%, actually 50% in the Toronto focus group were between the ages of 30 and 39. 100% of the focus group individuals had a graduate degree, 50% identified as Black or mulatto, and the other 50% were Caucasian. They were 50% were exclusively heterosexual. We did have 25% bisexual and 25% predominantly heterosexual. Again, in the disability, 50% of the focus group participants identified as having disabilities, including a brain injury, anxiety, and depression. Again, partner support seemed to be a high, partner support was the highest social support that the individuals identified. And 75%, we'll go to Renfrew. So again, the Renfrew women, 27% of the women here were between 30 and 39. 27% were over the age of 60, and 18% were between 20 and 29, which is, again, a little bit different than what we saw in the Toronto focus groups. The other interesting aspect was that 27% were Indigenous here, as opposed to the focus group in Toronto. They were predominantly heterosexual. 36% again identified as having disabilities, and a high number of the focus group women here got the majority of their support from the family, which is 67%. So there were some more findings that we found quite interesting. So 93% of the participants knew their aggressor. It included their bosses, fathers, friends, dating partners, boyfriends, grandfathers, or acquaintances. One woman did talk about being raped by a single guy, actually earlier that year, and had been molested by her grandfather and raped by her father. We did note that a number of the women who had childhood sexual abuse or assaults did have more assaults after that, which is, I think that's borne out in the statistics as well. There is a quote that I will let you read. It does seem kind of ironic that even the police in some areas were afraid of the perpetrator. Some of the other findings that we found in our court watch and our CAMLIT, in terms of the legal system, not surprising that 100% of the judges are white, 50%, a little over 50% were women. The Crown attorneys, same kind of makeup with the Crown attorneys, 85% being white. And I think we're getting better with the female Crown attorneys, but we're not quite there yet. Complainants, 92 identified as women, 4% were male, and 18% of the women identified in the literature as having disabilities. 50% were below 30 years of age. Next slide.
Hello? Oh, you did, the defendants were, 46% of them were identified as white. No.
It's covered under my computer here, but the defendants, 100% were male, 20% below 30 years of age, 36 were 40, over 40, and 36% were found guilty, which is, I guess, what we all know. There isn't a high percentage of guilty findings. 8% pleaded guilty and had absolute discharge. What we found in the individuals as well, that 70% of the cases, drug use or alcohol was mentioned as a factor. 14%, very low, as we all are aware of, that only 14% were stranger attacks. It does dispel, again, the myth. So I remember one interviewer had asked the question, why didn't you go to the police? And I can't see the answer here, so.
I can read it. It says, because I knew there was a whole lot of bullshit coming. It's true. That's Renfrew County participant number 3.
Okay.
And then another one, so the justice system for me, I have no confidence in them whatsoever. That's also Renfrew County participant number 1.
Okay.
I'm going to take you through what a framework that we developed called the 5 C's of sexual violence. It actually started, we actually developed this framework when we did research on strangulation and non-fatal strangulation and women survivors' experiences of non-fatal strangulation by an intimate partner. For this particular research, we expanded it into 5 C's of sexual violence. The C's stand for context. So the what, the who, when, where, and why. Next C is consequences, the social, legal, physical, emotional, and financial impacts on survivors and the perpetrators. The third C is communication, which is sort of looking at the conversation that's being had about sexual violence. Next C is care, understanding the various interventions adopted by survivors during the assault. So whilst the rape is happening, what are women doing to survive and care for themselves? And what are women doing post the violence. So care is a very critical contextual conversation to have. And then critique was the fifth C, which is looking at the implications of all the other C's of gender-based sexual violence. So under context, we asked the 5 W's: the who, what, where, when, why. And this is a really powerful quote from a Toronto participant number 5, who said, "I'd already been warning people. I'd been tracking his movements online and then going to people and events like, you need to watch this person. And I'd been doing all these things. And I'm like, this isn't enough. What happens if he rapes a friend of mine? And I could have done something." So this is important, because for a lot of the participants that we spoke to, why they decided to go and report was because they were worrying about the impact on somebody else that they knew, or somebody else that they, in their particular circle, being assaulted by this individual that was known to the community. The context, the what, it was important. It's not just the sexual assault that women experienced. There was physical violence. So women were stabbed, they had broken bones, they experienced hits to the head, face, and neck. There was strangulation. Some women were strangled and suffocated during the assault. Registered sex offenders, several of the perpetrators had been registered or were registered sex offenders, so they were already known to have committed this type of assault in the past. There were women for whom kidnapping and forcible confinement was an issue. There was breaking and entry, using restraints to bar women from leaving. As I said, the breaking and entry. There were multiple victims. Women would find that at the end that they were not the only person that this perpetrator had assaulted. There were threats, including threats to rape a victim's child, threats to kill the pets, threats to kill family members. Go backwards. And criminal harassment, stalking. So when you think about the assault, that as if the rape wasn't enough, there were all these multiple other criminal code offenses. And what was really interesting and really frustrating for us was that for those women for whom it did go to trial, oftentimes the assaults would be pled down. So it wouldn't be all of the assaults. They would just Crowns would allow the lowest assaults, or the lowest hanging fruit would be the one that would be prosecuted. Language matters, which is really important. So we prefer to talk about survivors as opposed to victims. Whilst we understand the victimology languages, because they are victims of a crime, the fact that they are now beyond the act and are in a survival mode, most of the women that we spoke to preferred the use of the word survivor. And as an organization, that's a term that we use. Declarations versus stories. My lovely colleague Shirley was actually the one that started this conversation around. She said that she hates the word story and the connotations of it being made up, right? Women's stories implies that it's fairy tales, and implies that it didn't really happen. So we'd asked our project coordinator, Shalina, to go away and find several other words that we can use instead. And she came back with 3. I think testimonial was one of them, but all of us said, nope, that sounded too much. It connotes religion as well as back into the criminal legal system. So declaration was the one that really, really resonated best with us, because it was like declaration of independence and declarations of war, and was really much more impactful. The women were standing here and making the declarations of their own truths. Just very quickly, we preferred reported versus alleged, because again, alleged implies that you're making stuff up. If it's reported, then you actually did go and tell somebody, so that's not actually playing loose and fast and loose with language. And violence versus assault, because violence, as Shirley said in the beginning, is more broad in its application, and assault is more narrow and restricted to the criminal code. Communication. Renfrew County participant number 1 said, I just want women to feel like they count, and that they're not cattle, and that they're not numbers, they're human beings, they're worthy, and they're valued. That's what I want. Women that have gone through that, to know and to feel that when they go through the system. consequences. Shirley, you're going to do this?
Yes. So I think we can safely say that the majority of these consequences for anyone that has been traumatized is completely expected. So the women talked about being frozen with fear, feeling weak, in shock, fearful all the time. Some of the women talked about having to move residence. They were afraid where they were, as the perpetrator was following them around. I think the one that really caught my attention was how it impacted on other relationships. I remember the one woman, unfortunately I don't have a slide on her, but she talked about the sexual assault occurred in her home, and her two sons were in the next room. And following the sexual assault, she felt it wasn't possible to really hug her son, and she just was so distressed with the fact that, you know, she was always really cuddly, and now it just didn't feel as though she had the energy, or she just had this loss, this sense of loss of being able to hug her son, and it was certainly quite emotional. And I'll have to read the statement.
Participant Renfrew County Focus Group number 2, participant number 4 said, everything hurts. I tend to push it down and make sure it's a nice, big, tight knot ball in my stomach. So I have a lot of gastrointestinal problems. I have IBS. Renfrew County participant number 7 said he's only doing 5 months, I'm doing 45 years. Renfrew County participant number 5 said, for years of my life, for my childhood, he got 18 months. Toronto Focus Group number 2 said he was also my boss because I worked at Jack Astor's and he was a manager there, so there's a power imbalance, and I feel like other people at work knew about it somehow and I didn't know. Renfrew County participant number 4 said, for the longest time, oh, this is the one Shirley was referring to, for the longest time, my son couldn't even sleep in the same bed with me because, like, I'd have anxiety from just someone lying beside me, but it's getting there. It's taken 6 months. Renfrew County number 3 said, I have more nightmares about the court process than I do about the actual incident, and it just doesn't make sense. So I was so caught off guard when I was in court. All I remember is a Crown attorney saying, don't show any emotion. So I just tried to keep it cool. I wanted to lose it, but I didn't. Toronto participant number 1 said, I got the sense that it wasn't important enough, or that my assault wasn't horrible enough for them to go forward with. I kind of realized he's disgusting, and I think that it should go to trial, and I wanted to go through, but they didn't end up listening to me about that. Renfrew County number 1 said, after so many years, like my strength has dwindled, and now I'm facing reality about the impact that this has had on me, and I'm feeling it in my body, I'm feeling it in my soul, I'm feeling it in my brain. Very quickly, Renfrew County Focus Group number 2, participant number 3 said, I finally went to the Aboriginal Health Centre in Ottawa, and an Indigenous health centre, and for once in my life, not only do they listen respectfully and have supports and groups and courses and workshops up the yin yang like crazy, wonderful, but it was almost like, duh, of course you've been abused. And it was like, yeah, it's a fact, and we're here to help you. I was like, what? You guys are all aliens, right? But Pequannogan is so fucked up, it's not even funny. They don't even allow sweat lodge ceremony, and the nurse practitioner there won't even deal with me, and the counselor is kind of like, well, there's that's too complicated. I'm like, well, I'm not that. Like, if you profile most of your clients, I'm really not that odd. Renfrew County Focus Group number 2, participant number 1 said, and then later in life, by the time I was 22 or 24, maybe something like that, I found the Women's Sexual Assault Center of Renfrew County, and that was probably the most amazing and most healing that I did ever to this day, because of the unconditional support that she received. So we created what we are calling Transformed Lady Justice. And all of you are familiar with the iconic symbol of justice. But for us, we, again, based on what we heard from survivors, we went away and created our own transformed version. Here, her blindfold is removed so that the law can see the injustices and the obstacles that survivors are facing. And at the same time, blindfold being taken off means that survivors are able to see the possibilities in front of them. This Lady Justice is not wielding a sword, she's holding a megaphone. And the idea is for her to use a megaphone to amplify her voice and the declarations of her truth. And the scales of justice are still there because it's really around, there still needs to be balance in administration of justice, and also speaks to the rights of survivors to receive fair treatment. Very quickly, the new justice model, these are the principles that we have: believe survivors, it has to be survivor-centered, justice matters, accountability for the perpetrators and the community. It has to be grounded in the 5 C's that we talked about earlier on. And it really should be about finding healing, not just for the survivor, but also for perpetrators. And I know this is a little bit of a controversial statement we're about to get into, but this is really what the survivors were telling us, and this is what we fundamentally believe. Our 260-something page report, I know it's a lot, but I'm hoping that all of you, if you haven't already read it, take time, glass of wine, and sit down and read it, because it really is powerful, and it's a way to pay homage to the women and the declarations that they made. So the report has quotes from the one-on-one interviews, it's got quotes from the focus groups, it's got quotes on the social media, and it's got quotes from our engagement in the system. So why did we choose this particular transformative accountability and justice model? We found this quote, we felt that this quote actually reflected what the survivors were saying. So Toronto one-on-one interview participant number 5 said, "For me, what I wanted, I hoped for, and I knew was a pipe dream, was I wanted accountability on his part, and this recognition of wrongdoing, some kind of apology, and then a learning. In my opinion, a full apology is only given when the person actually recognizes what they've done and takes steps to change that. So I was hoping there would be an accountability recognition of wrongdoing, and this would, he wouldn't do this to someone else." So the model, transformative, accountability, and justice were the 3 pillars that this is founded on. And the framework, right? I'm just going to go through this very quickly. We reviewed existing systems. So we went and did the court watch monitoring. We did some research. We listened to survivors, and then we engaged with our community partners in the conversations that we alluded to. And the guiding principles for this framework is accountability and allyship and accountability, understanding the importance of community accountability, and then figuring out ways to work collaboratively across the sectors. B is around believing survivors, not just because we're not just saying this because we're a survivor-based organization, but we fundamentally believe that this is how change happens. When you believe that women are not coming forward to make stuff up and just to get some poor man into trouble. The C is about change behavior, committing to creating real, impactful, and lasting behavioral and attitudinal change. And the D is about solutions. It's not about blaming, it's about finding real solutions that will have real, long-lasting and meaningful impact. So this is a very quick framework, and I'm going to say this very quickly because we will have ample opportunities after this going forward to engage in more nuanced and fuller conversations with all of you, members of the community. But I just want to fly through this very quickly because I want to make sure that we have time and space for questions and answers. So the framework, the model that we have is based on six stages. Phase 1 is outreach. Phase 2 is a referral. Outreach is that we go out into the community to raise awareness about this new model. Second phase is referral. So people, having learned about it, they say, okay, I think this woman, this survivor, and this perpetrator might benefit, this aggressor might benefit from this particular process. And then they send them to the program. We conduct a screening. One of the things that's really, really important is to say upfront that this proposal, this framework is not suitable for all perpetrators, because we recognize that there are some people, the violence and the level of misogyny that they have demonstrated is beyond the scope of this particular framework. And so we believe that the criminal legal system is could be used to address those types of perpetrators. So this screening process is to screen out the individuals who we feel won't benefit, right, from a program like this, and then screen in the individuals who we feel will benefit from a program like this. The next phase is the orientation process, and in this process is again really impactful in the sense that it explains to participants, the survivor as well as the aggressor. We try to manage their expectations, right, and explain to them what the process entails, and sort of supporting them to get an understanding of what their responsibilities. I'm talking specifically about the aggressor now, what his responsibilities are going to be, and for the survivor, what the opportunities are for her. Then there's the engagement process, which is the actual administration of the Transformative Accountability and Justice program. And then the phase 6 is the feed forward, which we're calling it feed forward, which is where we're collecting data, right? Research data, because that's also important as the process goes forward, and then, rinse and repeat and start the cycle again. This is, again, what it looks like for the survivor. Hold on, I'm going to go back for 1 second. Phase 5, you see phase 5, the engagement phase. This is what that engagement phase would look like. So it's for the survivor, it is survivor-centered, it's trauma-informed. Once she gets screened in, she gets a survivor support team that's set up just for her, and the team members will introduce themselves, explain the process, manage expectations, and review supports that meets her basic immediate needs, right? So housing, counseling, all of that sort of immediate need. That's the first step. And the second step is taking her through the Transformative Accountability and Justice program, which is, again, a comprehensive opportunity. We actually developed a program that we're offering. It's peer-based, called the C6 program, and we're hoping to model this transformative component for survivors based on that C6 program. So she goes through the Transformative Accountability. Then she develops what we call her justice statement, which is a list of sort of what she wants the aggressor to do in order to be accountable. And then her survivor support team takes her justice statement and liaises with his accountability team. And so there's this back and forth dialogue. But it's also, at the same time, she is working on developing a personal statement, which is we call it the personal transformation statement, which is, again, around her own sense of advocacy and agency. Very, very quickly, because I'm mindful of the time, what the program looks like for the aggressor is we talk about the importance of both the survivor and the aggressor being wrapped with support and kindness and compassion, because we believe that, finger pointing, blaming for some men is not the way to do it, because they will shut down. And for us to recognize that the best way to not have women being raped is by men to stop raping women. And the way to have men stop raping women is for them to be educated right around this. So this process is, again, is screened in, an accountability support team is assigned to him, wrapping him with kindness and support. He goes through his program. He reviews the justice statement that the survivor has written, again, done with the support of his team. And he also has a personal accountability and transformation statement that he works on developing throughout the program. Very quickly, the recommendations that we came up with after all of this is, obviously, listen to survivors and believe them. Facilitating healing. Hold on very quickly. Language matters. We use declarations and not stories. Be safer. This is really important. We're saying to everybody to be safer and do better for those survivors who may want to continue utilizing the current criminal legal system. And then to say, be safer and do better, especially for Black and Indigenous, trans, queer, disabled communities who also deserve justice. Recognize and respect that even small acts of courage for survivors is impactful. amplifying the humanity of people. I'm an abolitionist, and I think that even if the criminal legal system as it stands, even if it isn't disbanded, there are ways that it can be better and treat inmates more humanely. And then we also believe that there needs to be more participatory research, especially around the correlation between gender-based violence and gynecological illnesses, because a lot of the participants talked about that. Don't tinker. This is really, really important. Tinkering with the current system, I think, isn't going to do much. We're very, very, very grateful to the Canadian Women's Foundation because the After Me Too board, who gave us a little funding earlier this year to actually run a small pilot, which we started in June, to run a survivor and an aggressor in Toronto and replicate that in in Renfrew County. And then we're hoping for a comprehensive initiative and funding and partnership from the government. And next steps and questions. There we have it. I think we went over, Linda.
I know, but so much important information, Nneka, and thank you, Shirley and Nneka. I'm going to, with your permission, just jump right into some questions. One of the questions that came early on by a number of people was there outreach to trans survivors, and were there any trans survivors that participated?
That's a great question. We did outreach to our general membership, of which we do have trans women, but we didn't have any engagement. And even in the court watches that we monitored and the CanLII decisions, there wasn't anybody who identified as trans. Right, Shirley? I don't think so.
That's right. No.
And the comment, which I know both of you would agree with, just the incidence of sexual violence against trans folks, that it just would be really important at some point for them to be involved. You mentioned intoxicants, and there was just a question around clarification. Were you referring to the use of intoxicants by the perpetrator or by the victim, or both, or either?
It was by the perpetrator. A lot of, and this is I know there's been a lot of conversation around, how often women are drugged and how often drug-facilitated rapes occur. And we found, as the stats showed, that it was over 70%. So it wasn't that women, would get themselves drunk and then they were raped. They were drugged and plied with alcohol, and it was used as a way to make the violence more resistant, or make the victim less resistant and easy to facilitate the assault. So drug facilitation was not about survivors, taking drugs of their own volition. It was something that was either spiked or put in, or they were drunk. They were made to get drunk.
Thank you. Does your research, did it provide any information on how many judges and lawyers have formal education in terms of gender-based violence?
That's a great question. We didn't have an opportunity to do that, and it's interesting because we're sort of participating in the training for candidate judges around the social context of sexual violence. And well, basically from what we know is that judges don't. I think crowns, I know that there are specialized crown attorneys, specialized sexual violence crown attorneys. I know that there are specialized police on this area. But again, what we saw was, whilst there were some crown attorneys who were absolutely, absolutely phenomenal, dynamite, it wasn't consistent. And part of the challenge, part of the reason why there are so many things wrong with the current criminal legal system is that you should not be relying on who you get, right? It should be across the board. There should be consistency in expertise and knowledge, regardless of who the crown is, regardless of who the judge is. But because there isn't consistency right now, it really is a luck of the draw, and who you get determines the quality of the representation.
What training education skills do you think are needed to carry out the engagement phase in the process?
Wow, that's a great question. Shirley, I've been doing a lot of the answering. What about you?
That one's yours.
Oh, okay. What training and education? Well, okay, I'm going to give a plug to the work that we're doing with Linda and her team right now around competencies, developing competency for frontline people in the VAW. I think there's a lot, right? I think it's really around people who understand that centering the voices of the survivor is critical. So you don't need a formal education to understand that. Neither do you need to be a social worker, you know, particularly to understand that. I think anyone who has a really good understanding of the violence against women and, you know, the context of it, and a good understanding of systemic, especially when we're talking about Black and Indigenous and marginalized communities, anyone who has an understanding of the systemic impacts of the current system, if you have that understanding and you see this model as an alternative that walks parallel to the criminal legal system, we're not part of it, we don't want to be part of it. Transformative justice is not integrated into the current system, but it is outside of it. Anyone who understands the reason why you need to go outside in order to find justice, then you have the skills to refer people. I don't think you need any particular expertise to do the referral.
One of the questions, and it's really that we only have time for this one, and there are many more wonderful questions, so maybe we'll create another opportunity to have more dialogue with people because there's a great deal of interest. But people were curious as to, one, has this model been implemented anywhere? And two, the actual survivors that participated in this research, what did they think of the model that you're proposing? Did you have a chance to share it with them and to get their input once you developed your transformative model?
That's a great question. So we had, first of all, the question around where is it being used anywhere else? As I said, no, this will be the first time it's used in the Canadian context. As I said, it came from the United States, from Black, Indigenous, etc. Disability activists. It's the Bay Area in, my brain's died. It's in
California.
Yeah, no, and San Diego and the Bay Area. Anyway, so no, it's not in Canada right now. And the opportunity to share it with the survivors that we spoke to, we had all of these grandiose plans pre-COVID to bring the women together, because it's almost like a closing the circle, and to share with them what we had found. But yeah, COVID happened. We've been trying to coordinate with Kim and Joanne in Renfrew County, as well as the community of women in Toronto. But no, so we haven't had a chance to do that yet. But just again, to stress how everything that we've incorporated into this new model was based on what we heard from the women. So the idea of an opportunity for the aggressor to learn, right? We've incorporated in that. A lot of women were saying that they don't think that the criminal legal system, him being found guilty, is not going to change his attitude. In fact, women were talking about he'll go, if he did get incarcerated, he'll just go in there and become a better criminal. I don't mean a better person, but just a better criminal in knowing how to maneuver and navigate. So interrupting the criminal legal system's hand in the process was really paramount for a lot of the women. But we plan on making it happen, because it is important for us to bring it back to the community that informed the work and share, and again, have them feed in and critique and comment on what we've developed. And I also want to say that if anybody in the audience is interested in having further conversations with us, really nuanced conversations with us about this program, and are interested in ways to get involved in the development and administration of it, I'm going to, Linda, you're going to share our email addresses, but you can contact us at WomenatthecentrE. Look at our website. And we're also very quickly next week going to be launching a website that's specifically around this transformative accountability and justice model. It'll have our executive summary, which is much shorter than the 260-something pages. And it will also have a great little video that explains sort of the genesis and what people can do around getting involved.
That's wonderful, NECA, and we'd be happy to provide links to your new website that's going to come up so that people that were part of this can find those links readily and get to that website. Sounds like lots of valuable information. I just want to share on behalf of all the participants there, I've been able, while you've been presenting, to keep track of the chat. And the words like, this is inspirational, refreshing, thank you so much. Those are the kinds of responses that people have been sharing. And we didn't get a chance to go there, but people also expressed concern about how your team looked after yourselves, given this is really challenging work and you were hearing declarations that cannot help but impact profoundly. And so people were concerned about that, and we want you to take care of yourselves. We look forward to future conversations, and we will do our best to direct people to the website and to look for more opportunities for more nuanced conversation.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having us.
Very welcome. Please fill out the evaluation. The link is in the chat box, and know that that's also how you generate your, how we generate the certificate of participation for those who were with us today. Shirley, NECA, thank you. Take care. We'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.